What are you working on?
Story about history.
Of the fashion industry?
History of New York. These days, it's not easy to elbow into the world of New York fashion. But once upon a time, clothing was the city's biggest manufacturing business and the easiest place for immigrants to find jobs. Fashion has always been full of opportunity, but it's never been for the faint of heart. This season, before New York Fashion Week, I called Fern Mallis, the event's longtime director, for some special access. Not backstage, but back in time.
This was the entry point for immigrants at the turn of the century who came here and learned the skilled labor of pattern making, cutting, and producing. And the fashion industry was very much part of American history. And it still is. You know, you scratch the surface, almost anybody in New York had some connection to this industry at some point in their history.
Fern was right. I scratched the surface by getting in touch with my favorite historian, my grandmother, Ellen Avins, also known as Mum. She told me my own great-grandfather, Hyman Sharfstein, started out as a sewing machine operator in the early 1900s and eventually owned his own knicker factory. Back then, 3/4 of the city's garment workers were European Jews, so it seems my great-grandfather's odds of ending up in the schmata trade, that's Yiddish for rag, would have been pretty good. I found a copy of the ledger from the ship that brought my great-grandfather to Ellis Island in 1906.
You know, I've never seen that. And this says painter, which he was not, but a tailor, I guess that fits in very well.
What was the first factory?
The first one was on Green Street in Soho. There was the unionization movement in New York, which caused many small factories, these were, to move elsewhere.
At the turn of the century, garment workers downtown began to strike for better wages and conditions. One walkout of 60,000 workers lasted for 3 months. So, in 1926, Mum's family did the same thing we see manufacturers do today. They went where the labor was cheaper, the outer boroughs. It was globalization on a New York City scale.
In Rosebank, Staten Island, where we settled, everybody was probably a first-generation Italian, and that was the source of labor for the factory.
Mum was observing the next wave of European immigrants to make their way through the garment industry. By the time the Sharfstein Pants Factory moved to Staten Island, New York City was home to 800,000 Italians. Only Rome had more.
And this is wartime, and during that time...
That was 1943. By then, the Nazis had occupied Paris, and the French had to cancel their famous fashion shows. Democracy may have been crumbling in Europe, but Eleanor Lambert, a New York City publicist, saw a glimmer of opportunity. She invited 150 journalists to a new fashion showcase, New York Press Week. It would take a while for Press Week to catch on, but Eleanor Lambert was just the first in a thread of American women to find opportunity on 7th Avenue. Years later, Fern Mallis would tag along with her dad to work at a scarf business on the very same street.
It was always a treat to go to work with Daddy when seeing fashion directors and buyers. They became the role models for me, seeing these women in these jobs.
As Fern grew up, so did the U.S. fashion industry. And even though the age of outsourcing had begun, new waves of immigrants from Central America and Asia continued to find opportunities in fashion. Meanwhile, American designers were making names for themselves, but the fashion shows remained quiet and clubby affairs for industry insiders only.
You know, you'd maybe see a collection come out months later in the magazines, but it was like the best kept secret.
It was a secret until Fern got a hold of it in 1993, when she organized about 30 shows at Bryant Park and really put New York Fashion Week on the map.
Creating the tents in Bryant Park really made a difference. People could not pay attention to what the New York designers were doing.
And they'll still be paying attention this September, when Fashion Week moves to Lincoln Center. The tents might be gone, but Fern will still be there, overseeing the shows as an independent consultant.
For just about all of the 18 years that I'd been heading up Fashion Week, we'd always do lots of interviews. Inevitably, the first question anybody would ask is, who's new? I think Bibu Mohapatra is a great designer who people don't know very much about yet.
Bibu Mohapatra left India 14 years ago to make his way to Manhattan and study at FIT. This September, he'll show his 4th collection at New York Fashion Week.
Talk about inspiration, like, and it's like being in New York, you walk out in the street, like you're bombarded with stimulus impact and by people and things that you see. This is where it all started in America.
I think the new designers are really where the energy is and where the new blood is. And they don't all succeed, but many of them do. And it's a tough business to be in, but this is the city that just sucks them in. Just reaffirms that the old adages about America and the land of opportunity, and and if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. And that's, there's truth to those words.
For more than 100 years, there's been truth to those words, but just like Fern said, it's a tough business to be in. In CLOSETTOUR's next webisode, I'll see if the city still has what it takes for the new generation of fashion pioneers to make it in New York.